Hi, my name is Preetpal, and we have a fantastic guest with us today. Name's Jeff, Jeff Siegel. Jeff, why don't you take a second and introduce yourself?
So I help men overcome bad habits, develop a more balanced and sustainable lifestyle through mindset coaching, nutrition coaching, exercise coaching, and really taking a holistic approach to how do we change our behavior sustainably, right? So not just quick fixes, not just more information, but transformation. And this comes from years of experience working with clients, background of education, development, and then also my own experience, in working with my health, and really making sure that I'm taking good care of my mind and my body.
Yeah. So that's very interesting, Jeff. Right. So basically, there's a world out there, and they are preaching a lot of stuff around diets and exercise in the gym. You're saying that's important, but you're saying there's something more important than that.
That's important, but by itself, it's not enough because you can have the best exercise program, right, in the world, but if you don't have the right mindset, then it's not going to stick. Right. And weeks or months down the line, like something's going to happen, some changes in life is going to throw some stress at you and it's going to knock you off your plan. And you don't have the mental resilience or the emotional awareness to really deal with that sort of challenge when it happens. You're not adaptable enough. So what I really work on is both having the external structure, right? So yes, we want to make sure that we have a good exercise program that makes you happy, that you enjoy, that you can follow. And we want to make sure that you have the basic dietary education that you need so you can make, sensible choices about what you're eating. But we also need to do the inner work to make sure you've got the right mindset to support all of that. And that allows you to be adaptable. The problem is when we just focus on external behaviors, we either get caught in rigidity or chaos, right? And the rigidity is like, oh, I need to follow this exact game plan, right? Step by step, step by step. And if you don't follow it, then you've lost, right? And that's a huge problem. This all or nothing thinking, right? Either I've got on my game plan or I've fallen off the wagon, and and then that leads to this, a lot of binging, and then this fuels this cycle of then overeating and then restricting, or being really good about taking care of your exercise and then not doing anything for months. And so this sort of flip-flopping back and forth between these extremes is what I see happen so often with guys. And so we need to, again, do the outer work and the inner work together for really produce sustainable change.
Mhm. So, Jeff, where did this all start? Tell us about your life's journey and story.
I often begin this story as a teenager. I was around 14 years old, and going through a lot of physiological changes, right? So, kind of puberty, right? Hormones were happening. Started developing bad acne, but also started, developing muscles, and having sex drive. So like all of these things were happening, and I think it's confusing. I didn't have a lot of good male role models to show me, how do I take care of my body? How do I show up and be a healthy and powerful man in the world, right? All I really had was sort of the stereotypical, kind of macho or stoic examples of what it means to be a man. And I was, an emotionally sensitive guy, and that side, I didn't know what to do with all of that. And so, that combined with a lot of, internal pressure I put on myself to be a high achiever, perfectionist, desire to control all these things. I think as a 14-year-old, I looked out and the world was very big and scary. And I was like, oh my God, there's a lot of things out here I can't control. But you know what I can control? I can control every single thing that I put in my body. So I became hyper focused on food, hyper focused on calories and nutrients, and counting and measuring, and there's a healthy element to that. I learned an incredible amount about nutrition and about what the appropriate macronutrients are, and what my needs are. But they were coming from this place of insecurity and fear, and that led me to really extreme eating behavior that ultimately I lost so much weight. I was, really jeopardizing my health. I had to drop out of high school, a pretty significant eating disorder. And it was, in those dark moments where I recognized that I really needed some help. And I was very fortunate that my family, and others were able to give me some supports to crawl myself out of that hole. So that was the kind of the origin story. And since then, I went on a long meandering journey through college and postgraduate and master's degrees, studying everything from Buddhist psychology to neuroscience and behavioral biology, and really trying to figure out how can I help other men avoid these pitfalls, right? So they don't have to fall into the same traps that I did.
Right. So fast forward to today, from that 14-year-old teenager, what did you learn about men?
It's a great question. I wish I could encapsulate that in a single sentence or two. Um, I think what I've learned that is so important is that we constantly need to be updating our beliefs and checking our assumptions. And it's often the assumptions that we're making that we haven't double checked that end up becoming some of the biggest barriers. And it's often the beliefs that used to work for us 5, 10, 20 years ago that now are actually roadblocks preventing us from getting what we want. And this is what's so hard is I find a lot of people, they develop it. If we just use food as an example, right? You develop certain eating habits, when you're a teenager or when you're in your 20s, and they might work for you at that point in time based upon your body, your metabolism, based upon your lifestyle, your activity, based upon your finances, right? But obviously when you're 30, when you're 40, when you're 50, you can't keep eating the same way that you did when you were 20. And so a lot of times people have a real challenge in updating, their eating patterns to reflect, their current biology and their current lifestyle.
Yeah. I think that's a very interesting phenomenon which you just talked about, and add to that we men, we tend to oscillate between being that machoistic role model for whoever is around us, or that stoic silence which is eating up all the pressures of the world. And as we all know, stoicism teaches us to be more restrained and controlled and all that. I just feel like I had to say this on your comment, which is, men are generational in nature. Like, if you're living in a certain time, and that time promotes a certain prototype of a male, we all try to conform to that thing. And we men are also a children of conviction, so we hold certain things very, very dear to our heart, and we try to kind of live up to it, right? Whether that was our father or the genre of movies we saw at that point of time, so on and so forth. But I think life has a different manifestation altogether versus these templates, right? So I think we all kind of struggle, and we navigate through that process of what that template looks like as a man, and what it should be based on science and biology and all that. So the fact that you've been meandering through the woods and trying out so many things, is pretty interesting. So I would love to double click into where did you meander, what did you learn, right? So first right off the bat, right? So I think you are different than some of the folks I spoke to before. So eat more broccoli doesn't work. What works?
You know what? If you like broccoli, eat more broccoli, right? If you don't like broccoli, that's totally fine. Let's find some other green vegetable that maybe you do like, right? Or maybe you haven't, tasted broccoli prepared the way you like it. So, what I think that what often happens is we spend too much time focusing the conversation on food and like
Right.
good food, bad food, or eat this, don't eat that. And what we really need to spend more time thinking about is not food, but who you are as an eater. And so, what do I mean by that? Who you are as an eater is the identity and the mindsets that you're bringing, right? Because it shapes everything that you see when you look at a plate of food. Are you looking at it as carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and calories? Are you looking at it as this is a plant that was grown from soil and rain and sunshine in the earth? Are you looking at it through the perspective of culture and tradition of like, well, I like my broccoli prepared this way, but I don't like it prepared that way? Are you looking at it through the lens of convenience of like, I'm hungry, I need something to eat. Like, I don't care if it's broccoli or if it's just like, give me something, right? So it's like the mindset shapes how we relate to the food. And to me, that's a much more important question for us to be talking about, because that is ultimately what's going to determine then the downstream behaviors of what actually ends up on your plate and in your mouth. And so this is where I'm always trying to go upstream to ask, what is the mindset that you're bringing? And I think there's many, I talk about, there's sort of 5 core mindsets that I find that most people tend to have when it comes to food, right? One is the lens of convenience, right? Which is really the most basic sort of animalistic lens of like, right? Like our body needs energy, right? So what's going to be the biggest bang for our buck, right? Now, and so we just eat. If we see food, we eat it, right? And right, evolutionarily, this makes a ton of sense. If right, when we are in an environment of scarcity, then yeah, we should take every opportunity to eat the food that comes by. The challenge is right now, right, we live in a food abundance. And so this sort of convenience mindset can lead to all sorts of overeating, compulsive eating, mindless eating, right? Just eating when we don't actually need more food. So that's one piece. The second one is eating for pleasure, right, and emotional comfort. Right now, again, we live in a world where food is incredibly delicious, but it's also become weaponized by companies and agriculture and food scientists that have designed the perfect bite, right? We talk about hyper palatable foods. These are foods that are designed to kind of hijack our reward and neurochemistry to make us continue to eat and to want more and more and more. And so, I think there's the beautiful side of eating for pleasure is, these culinary masterpieces where you take a lot of time and energy into finding the right spices and the right ingredients, and you develop a really complex dish. But then we have this fast food commoditized, side of it, which is just like, just eat more and more and more because it's profitable for those companies to get us to eat more and more and more. And it's really hard to stop that. So that's the second one. The third one is what I call our social eater. We all have a social eater, right? Historically, most meals were consumed communally. We did that in relationship with family, with tribe. And that has important regulators on our food consumption. When we're sharing food with other people, when there's conversation, it brings a more meaningful context to our eating. And a lot of eating nowadays, especially more of the sort of problematic eating that I see with people, happens in isolation. Right? It usually happens when you're alone, when you're at home at night by yourself. There's no social checks and balances to help you regulate that food. And I think that we've lost a lot of deeper meaning that happens from that piece. There's also a dark side to the social piece. They call it the social facilitation of eating. It's this idea that the more people you're with, right, the more you end up eating, and for all sorts of various reasons. Usually there's more food on the table. Usually you're sitting around in front of food longer and all sorts of other things. So all these things can kind of go both ways. I don't want to say that any one of these mindsets are good or bad. They both have positive qualities, and they also have some vulnerabilities that we need to pay attention to. Right. The fourth one is this idea of being a goal-based eater. And this is really looking through the lens of nutrition. Right. And so, this is much more of a modern lens of like, okay, am I getting enough protein in this meal? Have I gotten essential fatty acids that I need to regulate my hormones? Or am I getting enough fiber to regulate my, GI system? So we kind of think about those things, and you're trying to balance all those out. And again, we've learned so much about what sort of foods in the right proportions are generally going to be good for our health. And yet this also has a dark side, right? Like I said, for myself, leading to an eating disorder where we try to over control, or we try to micromanage every little thing. We get caught up in this diet mentality where we're counting calories, and then we're restricting and denying our hunger in our body. And it can fuel this really, just self-destructive cycle. So you need to be really careful about balancing that mindset out. And then there's the last one that I call the sort of the environmental perspective. And I think this one is something that's still really emerging, especially in the United States. I was just traveling over in I was in Stockholm in Sweden, and I was so impressed because I was at a restaurant, and on the menu, they didn't have any calorie counts. There wasn't any calories. There wasn't any, protein. They actually had carbon footprint counts of each food. So you could make your decision of what to eat based upon how environmentally responsible that dish was. And to me, that kind of blew my mind of like how far ahead they are in terms of thinking about the environmental impact of the food systems. And so this is, a new sort of way of thinking about food is just not just what's good for me, but what's good for the planet. Because right now, the ways in which we are feeding ourselves globally are pretty unsustainable. And we're going to need to make some shifts there in terms of, eating patterns to help change that. So I think of all these three things, again, convenience eater, pleasure eater, social eater, goal-based eater, environmental eater. These are the different mindsets. And when you can begin to work with these, you develop a flexibility and an adaptability to eat in an entirely different way because you're not stuck. The problem is becoming stuck in just one mindset, and then you miss out on all of these other perspectives. So this is something that I really like to introduce and to teach to people.
Oh, that is very, very insightful, I believe, right? And I think you're starting from a point of view that behind any of this eater is a mind.
Mm.
And for you to understand that mind is very, very important.